Thank you, Jono. Well, our next guest was thrust into the spotlight by the most horrible of crimes. His wife Jill's random murder galvanised and terrorised Australians as police hunted her killer on the streets of Melbourne. Throughout it all, Tom Meagher was a pillar of strength to her family and friends, as well as a picture of dignity in public. He joins us very shortly, but first, let's take a look at his story. Nearly half of all women have experienced violence since the age of 15. For 1/3, it's physical assault, and 1 in 5, sexual assault. For Tom Meagher, these statistics just aren't good enough. His tragic story shocked the nation. His wife Jill was walking home from drinks with friends when she was brutally attacked and murdered. From the blind panic of her disappearance to the chilling shock he felt in court, the devastating turn of events changed his life forever. Now, with her killer behind bars, Tom is speaking out about violence against women. Now, Aisha, I'm going to hand over to you for this very important interview.
Thank you, Sarah. And Tom, welcome to Studio 10.
Thank
you. It's been just over 18 months since Jill was killed. How have you coped? I mean, obviously your life has changed tremendously.
Yeah, obviously it's completely changed. I suppose the way I cope is through the massive support of friends and family, and you know the ongoing campaign that I'm doing at the moment to stop violence against women.
I'll get to ask you more about that as we go along. You've gone back to Ireland, haven't you?
Yes, yeah.
It's more comfortable there?
I suppose Melbourne kind of had I mean, although I have so many great people in Melbourne, I suppose my family and friends are here and my home is here. And when Jill died, I suppose Melbourne had a different feel to it, a kind of obviously sort of a darker presence to it that didn't feel as comfortable as it was when we lived there together.
No, I can understand that. Now, you recently wrote an essay, and it's received a lot of comment here in Australia. Why did you write it?
I wrote it to sort of underline a commonly misunderstood thing where people like Adrian Bailey get a lot of attention in the media, which is correctly, because he's obviously a horrible man. What I was trying to highlight was the fact that the spectrum of violence, men's violence against women, is a lot deeper than that, and and most of it happens in the home, and most of it is suffered in silence, and most of it is perpetrated in silence, and most of it is done by men who aren't necessarily lurking on the street waiting for their victim. Most of it is perpetrated by men who purport to love the victims.
And they look like regular men, don't they? And that was one of the things that shocked you when you were in court and you heard Bailey's evidence for the first time. He was articulate, and you didn't think he'd be like that at all. What did you think he'd be like?
Well, I just didn't know. I'd never heard him express himself before, and even what he said, it wasn't exactly something incredibly articulate. It was just he formed a sentence. And I think it was just a bracing moment, the recognition that this man was human in some way, as opposed to a monster, or as opposed to something, just a madman, that he was actually articulating a sentence. And I suppose that was more of a bracing moment that sort of led to a lot of a bit of an inner battle, if you will, with me, just in terms of how to come to understand this kind of behaviour in human beings.
Do you think that's how the public perceive men like Bailey? Do you think that we think of them as monsters and we don't realise that they could be the bloke walking down the street who looks like just any old bloke?
I think that there's a lot of people do think that these people are monsters. And look, Bailey is a massive extreme in the spectrum of men's violence against women. And he is, as close to a monster as you can possibly get, which is why it was so bracing when I heard him speak. But I think that what I was trying to get at is that most men who commit these crimes are not as extreme as that. Or even if they are, they commit those crimes in a domestic atmosphere. I mean, 90% of them are committed by somebody who's known to the victim.
I seem to remember right at the very beginning, before they located Bailey, that you were a suspect for a second. There was a bit of community discussion that maybe you had killed your wife. How did you feel? You must have been aware of that.
I was aware of it to some extent. I mean, I was very shielded. I was very sheltered from it in a way, because I had a lot of friends and family who were kind of embargoing sort of internet usage on me, but I certainly was aware of it. Obviously, it was very unpleasant. On top of everything else, on top of the fact that media had sort of crowded our apartment.
Were you angry?
There was. I wasn't angry at the time. I was so worried about where Jill was at the time that I wasn't angry. That did come later. I was angry about 3 months later. I think I started getting angry about that. I mean, it came and it went, I suppose. But I definitely did get angry about that at some stage, but not at the time.
Did you think the world was unfair?
Absolutely. I mean, again, at the time, the numbness kind of overcame me, so I didn't really think of it that way at the time. But certainly, after a period of time, of course, I mean, your wife is taken from you, and people have written nasty things on the internet, and so I mean, of course, you're going to be upset. You're going to be angry.
Let's explore anger for a moment. You wrote about the anger you felt when you saw Bailey in the court. I think a rage, and you said, I think, that it would take a miracle, a religious miracle, for you to change your view of him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to change my view of him. I mean, I don't know how I could do that. This man didn't just take my wife from me. He did it in the most brutal way you can imagine, and not only to my wife, but to many women before that. And there's no redemption for that man. I mean, I can't sit here and say there's going to be a time when I'm not angry at that man, because it would be obtuse. I think what the better thing to do is to channel my anger into something different, which is what I'm trying to do now. When this started, I had a lot of anger towards him, which manifested itself in hatred and revenge fantasies, and I came to realise that, look, this is destructive, and I wanted to do something constructive with it.
I'm going to explore that with you after the break, but before we go to that break, just tell me, what plans did you and Jill have for the future? What did you see ahead for the pair of you?
Well, myself and Jill were kind of talking about sort of settling down. Like, we don't obviously already settled, but like, we were talking about sort of, maybe having a family and buying a house, and I suppose stuff that young couples do. We were very happy and at home in Melbourne, and obviously everything's completely changed.
We'll have to take a very short break, but we'll be back with more of Tom Maher's story right after this. Welcome back to Studio 10. Now, if you've just joined us, Ita has been speaking exclusively with Tom Maher. He was in the news, of course, 18 months ago after the random murder of his wife Jill in Melbourne left us all terrified. With the killer now behind bars, Tom is back in Ireland with a new focus in his life. Ita, I'll pass it back to you and Tom.
Tom, your new focus now is to speak out more about violence against women, and the statistics are horrifying. It's very widespread, isn't it?
It is very widespread, and it's again unacceptable. And look, there's I think the massive problem with it is that there's a culture of silence about it, and I think there's almost a don't ask, don't tell policy in place about it, and the idea that I think that the perpetrators kind of think they can get away with it because it happens behind closed doors. But these statistics are just appalling, and it needs to be dealt with.
Is it an issue that men need to speak out more about?
Absolutely, I think men need to take some leadership within their own peer groups. I mean, I've been with men obviously my whole life, and you often see people like in the pub just just unthinkingly saying something disparaging about women almost rolls off the tongue, and it's almost like it's a routinized sort of automatic reaction. Even if they might not mean anything by it, they might be enabling somebody else that they're with, or somebody else that's overhearing them, who does commit violence against women, who does feel enabled by this kind of dominance and for the idea that women are subordinate to him.
You wrote about the fact that a lot of women don't report offences. You even singled out prostitutes, and you said there's a community attitude that thinks, oh well, if you're a prostitute, well, it doesn't really matter. But that it really does matter, doesn't it? It doesn't matter what a woman does for a living. She doesn't need to have anyone be violent toward her.
Yeah, well, I think there's an attitude towards sex work that sort of it sort of puts women in two categories. You know, I mean, I think sex workers are almost invisible in society. So if something happens, I mean, if you look at the women Bailey had brutally raped before Jill, you know, those rapes were, I mean, unbelievably bad. And you know, it didn't seem even newsworthy. It wasn't even in the public consciousness. Like, those women are sort of invisible in our society, and it needs to be dealt with, because it's something that we tend to value one woman over another simply because of what she does, or some preconceived sociological idea of who she is.
I mean, are you? We talked about anger before, but I just want to revisit it. I mean, are you angry that he was still out? I mean, if you think, I mean, I've never lived in Australia where it hasn't been safe to be a woman until now. I have to say, I feel quite unsafe now in my own country. And you just think Jill's going home after a night out with friends, you know, something a lot of us do. And yet Bailey was out on leave, and the awful thing happened, as we all know. I mean, you must get very angry about this. I mean, he should have been behind bars. Well,
of course. I mean, you know, he not only did what he did and was let out on parole, but he violated his parole. He could have been called back. His parole could have been cancelled at any stage. He obviously brutally attacked a man in Geelong, and his parole still wasn't cancelled. I mean, I don't know what this man has to do to be put behind bars until obviously he murdered my wife.
Well, but I mean, before that, he
committed unbelievable offences.
What would you say to governments, if you could, about this sort of situation?
Well, I'd say it's time to take some real leadership. I mean, you know, this is something that we shouldn't need to be telling them. They know the numbers. They know this goes on. They have to know the numbers. At this stage, we shouldn't have to ask them to find a solution, because that's a failure of leadership. They should be out there looking for solutions right now.
You're very much involved with the White Ribbon campaign now in Ireland. What does that entail?
Yeah. That entails we go around to sort of different organisations, schools, universities. What we do is we try to raise awareness about gender equality and men's violence against women, and we try to engage sort of, especially young men, we try to engage them to be leaders amongst their peer groups, and to stand for gender equality, to stand for things that, I mean, basic respect, basic things that all men and women should be doing anyway, and shouldn't have to be taught to people. But unfortunately, we don't live in a society where that happens. So we go around to not only young adults, but also adults in organisations, in public and private organisations, and try to get them to understand the importance of this issue.
And to say that violence against women is unacceptable, and you're doing it really because of Jill. I mean, it's Jill that's driving you here. And tell me, finally, you know, what's your happiest memory of something you and Jill did, or your time with Jill?
I have so many happy memories of Jill. I mean, I suppose, I mean, there's thousands. I mean, you know, finding our first apartment in Melbourne, you know, waking up next to her on our wedding, the day after our wedding day. There's just an unbelievable amount, and I don't think I could pick one out of all those things. But it's you know, it's what keeps me going, the memory of those amazing times, you know.
I think she'd be proud of you, Tom. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you. No worries, thank you.
Tom Meagher, what a remarkable and brave human being. Thank you so much for joining us. And for more information on the White Ribbon campaign in Ireland and Australia, just visit whiteribbon.ie and whiteribbon.org.au.